Welcome into the RotoViz Best Ball show. This is Colm Kelly. I'm joined by Tom Strachan. We're looking forward here to drafting over at DraftKings and having some fun as we attempt to win $1.5 million, which would be nice in 9-10 months time if it all came to play here, Tom. But we are going to do some of these streams over the next couple of weeks, both here on the RotoViz YouTube channel and then over at the Fantasy Football Sanctuary, kind of a back and forth, a home and away, and we're going to have some fun jumping onto both sides. So I will highly recommend subscribing to the work that Tom and the gang are doing over there. He'll be able to fill you in a little bit more on it as we go through the show. But we will be doing this basically same edition, same time, hopefully next Thursday or next Tuesday. Sorry, I am flustered.
Had me going for a second.
Well, we have been doing the underdog streams on a Thursday so far. Myself and Blair did one last week, and we're going to kind of rotate the hosting duties there between the two of myself and Blair. And then, this is on a Tuesday. So we're trying to keep the live stream content coming for people and maybe a little bit of a different time than people are used to, nice and early on those, US side mornings. So with all that said, Tom, how are you doing as we get ready to draft on what I believe is now a Tuesday?
Yeah, all good. I mean, it's our time of year. So much best ball content out there to be watching, to be reading, to be listening to. So many drafts to be doing. It's a great time of year. Like, this is all those kind of pre-draft ideas that we had. Now it's time to put them into place. And we've got more information today than we've had at any point this year when it comes to these drafts. So it's a great time to be drafting.
It is. Obviously, the best ball has got earlier and earlier. Drafting has got earlier and earlier, and ADP is getting set earlier and earlier every year. And, as we say that now, next year, it will probably take another huge step forward as in terms of the overall industry. Best ball is still in its infancy and is going to continue to rapidly expand. You mentioned, some of the additional information that we do have now versus, even 2 weeks ago. But if you look back, 4 weeks or 6 weeks, we now know where all the rookies are for these NFL teams, how those depth charts are going to start to shake out. But you also have last week's announcement of the NFL schedule, letting you have the week 17, week 16, all that playing into factorization as well. So lots to get into, I guess. Though I mentioned we've been doing the underdog streams. We do a lot of content on the underdog side over at RotoViz. And obviously now we're doing this here, the first of the year on the DraftKings side on the RotoViz YouTube channel. What for you are some of the key differences between underdog and DraftKings when people are going into it? We did talk a little bit before it. Obviously you have an extra 2 rounds. Then you have full PPR versus half PPR. It's going to be interesting to work through all this today and do the draft in just a moment. But what are some of your key differences? Because you're in these streets more frequently than I am.
Yeah, and the extra 2 rounds really does make a difference. Guys who you would barely touch on underdog in the 18 rounds suddenly become way more consistently drafted. I'm sure that Kyron Williams was on a lot more teams on DraftKings last year than he was on underdog. So there's an element of that. There's an element of you can take the elite quarterbacks or tight ends, but still go up to 3 rather than stopping at 2 sometimes. We've seen some interesting builds that have worked. Go back a few years, and the team that won it 2 years ago had a 4 QB build with, I think it was both Jacoby Brissett and Jordan Love on, who barely played at all that year. So there's an element of you can get away with a little bit more. A
bit more flexibility, I guess, for, if you want to have extra wide receivers or extra running backs, but you can also do that at the tight end or quarterback because you have the 2 additional rounds. The other thing that would strike me for is there's times when we're in the 18th round and when you are heavily involved in, drafting or rookie drafts and, trying to know all these players as they come out of college, or even players who maybe are, down the depth chart, but there's still a chance of production or a breakout in this upcoming season. When you're in the 18th round on those underdog drafts, there's often a couple of names that you're intrigued in taking. So it can give you a little bit of an edge then when you have 2 additional rounds to add another 2 of those guys to your roster. So looking forward to seeing who our late round picks are in today's draft as well.
Yeah, massively so. I mean, it opens up the ability to get different quite easily. And I think that even though teams have won with like 4 quarterback builds and 3 quarterback builds over the last 2 years, this is going to be a year where people are so scared after 67 different quarterbacks started games last year that 2 quarterback builds are still really viable. And if that gives us an edge, it's well worth taking.
Yeah, and there's lots of ways. They drafted it with Blair this past week. We went kind of double elite tight end. I guess some people might be referencing that as a bully tight end build, but like you said with the elite quarterbacks, and this, that also gives you the additional aspect that you do not have to go and add that third or fourth. So you also have the strength then of having the flexibility for the running back or wide receiver positions with those late picks, as we touched on a moment ago. So we'll get into a draft in a few moments, but the other part of it is week 16, week 17, obviously lots of conversation around that for underdog, with a much flatter final this year in week 17, more payouts, obviously more big payouts coming the way of the people in the final rather than specifically to the first place participant. Over at DraftKings here, are we flat, like they have changed the final for underdog in 2024, or how are we looking overall for how important is week 16 versus week 17 in that discussion?
So there's definitely a few things. I mean, DraftKings last year, the Milly Maker was really good up top. I mean, it was 1,500 person final, so it was very difficult when you got there. This year, it's a 1,021 seat final. The progression goes top 2 qualify out of your initial pool, then top 1, and then you're in a 1,021 person final, which is, I mean, it's massive. You need to hit on the nuts to really get through. The amount you get for making it to the final on DraftKings isn't as good as underdog. You only hit $1,000 for making it to the final, which is 50 times your entry fee. Whereas on underdog, you're looking at $3,750 and the equivalent of if you'd max entered BBM. Yeah. So it's definitely not as good to just make the final. But if you finish inside the top 100, you're guaranteed 10K minimum, top 25, guaranteed 50K minimum. And inside the top 15, you're talking about 100K or up. So the prizes finishing inside that top 100 are pretty decent. I think if you can land one of those spots, you'd be pretty happy. But if you end up getting there and ended up with a min cash, it is going to feel quite deflating.
Yeah, so we are going to aim for that, top 15 finish at least here, Tom, with today's draft. But the other part of it there is it does make week 17 even more important in this particular field. Obviously, week 17 matters in all formats, but in this particular format, I have to say it matters. So we are going to answer some questions as we go through the draft. If you have any, comments, questions as we draft, either on players we talk about, select, or maybe just somebody you want to know in general or draft strategy, so that drop them into the chat. I see we have 95 people currently watching live, so make sure you subscribe and hit that like button. But as we get ready to draft, I'm excited, Tom, because we draft most years over the last kind of 2-3 years together. We're going to have some fun takes today. We're going to try and draft through and have a perfect team. We were thinking of titles for today's show. You had mentioned, how long can we wait to go ahead and draft a wide receiver? I didn't think that was clicky enough, so we will talk some zero RB as we make our way through it and see if zero RB will work in 2024 over on DraftKings, because I think, well, I know for a fact it's going to work over on underdog. So we'll probably take that approach. At this point, I don't even think we have to advertise that that's going to be the case, but let's jump into the draft. We'll have 30 seconds per pick. It's a $20 entry. We'll see how long it takes to fill up here, and we'll jump in and have some fun as we wait along for that. But I'm interested to get some of your thoughts on your targets and fades. I'm lucky enough to have access to Tom's Best Ball survival kit and looking through some of the information on that, along with the rankings and the ADPs for DraftKings. But some interested in targets and fades, and I think we're pretty much in agreement on the majority of them, but there might be some spots where we make a pitch for a player that maybe we're not in complete agreement on. So that will be fun as well. Is there any segment of your brain that thinks that zero RB or hero RB isn't the correct approach in 2024?
So, I mean, last year was a year where zero RB was perfectly set up to crush. And we saw that on Underdog. We saw that on Drafters. We saw it even on FFPC, I think. But last year, the team that won on DraftKings, and annoyingly, they don't put out their pick-by-pick data at the end, so we don't have all the kind of info. But the team that won everything on DraftKings was a team which had both Jonathan Taylor and Aaron Jones on there. So it's possible if that team was drafted earlier in the summer, maybe Jonathan Taylor was a hero RB build with it, or maybe it was like really close to the start of the season and it ended up being more like a semi-zero RB build if you were waiting till maybe round 4, round 5 to take Jonathan Taylor. So I think it can work. I think 2 years ago, the year that Pat Crane won on Underdog, and that was a year where Hero RB was just fantastic. I mean, that was Christian McCaffrey year.
Yeah.
Both Hero RB and Double Anchor RB made up over 15% of the total finalists on DraftKings that year, whereas Zero RB was down at 8.9%, which was only 0.2% more than Robust RB there. So I do think that there are a lot of ways.
Word up here. We'll have to get a beep button for that sort of language.
So I think there are a few more ways that you can skin the cat on DraftKings, as we kind of alluded to before anyway. But for me, if Zero RB is something that still isn't being done by the field as much, then it just means that it's just even more viable here. And because of the 20 rounds, if that gives us more opportunity to take shots at running backs in those late rounds, then yeah, I mean, we could go 5 wide receivers in our first 7 rounds and then end up with a total of maybe 7 overall, end up with, I don't know, like 8 running backs instead and just go a little bit heavier there. We are in the draft. It'll be a 2-minute wait till it starts, but we're going to be picking at the 10 hole. A couple of familiar names in here. Spot Rob, who probably should be doing work like most of us in the UK right now, but we won't snitch on him.
Yeah, the one thing with anyone who's watching along with the stream, do present yourself in the chat and let us know that you're there. But you can also, pick our players. We don't mind, but we'll continue to talk through the selection. But the one thing, the additional half point for the PPR, obviously this is full point PPR versus underdog. It does give, the pass catching running backs a big lift. So we've got so used to the half point and, maybe the top end guys like Christian McCaffrey even more valuable in this scenario, obviously. But that also leads to some of those zero RB guys being more pivotal to have on these rosters. So I'm excited to see how we play out in the draft. But you mentioned, the hero RB element in it, and the extra half for the PPR does really elevate that. The other thing from last year is if we look back at how running backs did basically through those opening 2 rounds, it wasn't like we're the profiles off those running backs are disappearing more and more. It's not a case that we're like Christian McCaffrey is a unicorn. We are not having multiple of him. Breece Hall could be that, but we're struggling to have 5 names who could legitimately, challenge for that elite end RB1 that was more commonplace, 3-4 years ago.
Yeah, and the other thing weighing on DraftKings is that you get the 3-point bonuses for 100-yard rushing games, 100-yard receiving games, and 300-yard passing games. You look at last year, there was 72 different running backs who had a 100-yard rushing game, but there were 162 wide receivers who had a 100-yard receiving game. So if we're including the flex, we could be starting 4 wide receivers. You're never going to start more than 3 running backs. So it all comes back to the wide receiver for me. I mean, 71% of teams in last year's DraftKings final had at least 8 wide receivers. And I just can't imagine finding myself in a situation where I won't be wanting to be heavy on wide receivers in every single draft this year.
Yeah, and again, as the draft plays out here, it always matters what position you're in. We're in the 9th spot, as you mentioned, and how it plays out. But if things work out and you have the option for the higher end wide receivers and then, those running backs in the 8 through 12, I'm always going to play it that way just based on the investment that's going to have to go into the positions. But we'll see how it plays out. But I do factor in that it's a little bit more beneficial, to have the pass catching running backs. I don't think it's that necessary to have early round running backs on your roster. Again, it all comes back to the conversation of zero RB. It's not just about not taking running backs at the start. It's about the profile of the running backs you draft and also the profile of the wide receivers that you take then as you go through the draft. And it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out. We do have Rob, as you mentioned, 2 spots ahead of us in the 7th spot, and we have another drafter here in the 5th hole. So we're going to have some competition, maybe play things a little bit close to our vest in those particular scenarios. But as I mentioned, any comments, any thoughts, drop them into the chat as we go through. The draft kicking off with Christian McCaffrey, Lamb, Brown, Hill, Chase, Brian Robinson. We are 3 selections away. Is there any dream player that you would like to see fall to us at this point?
I mean, Breece Hall is the one player that if he fell to us, it would be, okay, well, that's a smash, 4 picks past ADP. You'd want to be taking the value there and seeing if we can do something with it. But Justin Jefferson, I've seen him fall as far as the 11th spot in drafts. He does go as soon as I say that. But yeah, otherwise, this end of the draft, I've had a lot of picks here. I was chatting in our Discord this morning with a few people who feel like they've barely sniffed the beginning parts of the draft. So I'm kind of at that point where when I do land here, if there's no particular value, I don't mind getting different. We've got a choice of AJ Brown, Garrett Wilson, Jahmyr Gibbs, Marvin Harrison, Saquon, Drake London. What are you saying, Colm? Let's make your first draft.
I'm going to go with one of the wide receivers. I'd probably go with Wilson over Brown. The other option is you do have Puka there. You could play the ADP game and hope that you get 2 if you want to go that way. There's more chance that Wilson would come back.
So Puka went off the board.
He went.
So
let's go.
Yeah.
I thought that when we were watching it on the screen, I thought that Hall went the pick before us, but Nakua also went. So in an ideal world there, the 3 players that I had most interest in were Justin Jefferson, Hall, and Wilson. But I think we talked about this with Blair on the underdog drafts. I think my preferred range in these drafts so far is like pick 5 to 7. I think it gives you a huge amount of flexibility. We're just kind of 1 pick away there from getting... and I have Wilson in that same tier, but I just think the opportunity at those picks to get 2 of those names is quite interesting. So we are going to be picking now in a couple of picks, obviously, but Marvin Harrison's there, Saquon Barkley, Drake London. I'm very intrigued by Drake London this season, obviously now with Kirk Cousins there. We can talk more about him after the selection if we do take him, but is he the clear pick for you here?
Drake London's a player that at the moment that the Falcons got Kirk Cousins, for me, he was somebody I was going to be aggressive on. I've got 26% exposure to him so far, and I've not done that many drafts. I think I'm at about 30 or so, but I'll aim to be above 15% on him throughout this draft process. Colm, I've just got to bring your attention to the team at the 112, though. Travis Kelce is the tight end 1 over here on DraftKings, not on underdog. He does go at pick 23. I mean, how do you feel about that? Is that something you'd more be expecting to see on FFPC right now?
Yeah, well, you could say it would be more of a tight end premium pick, but if you are drafting and you want to get your players, I will never stop somebody, going and get their players. But realistically in this draft, I would think that, that's Harrison, and then Drake London goes 1 pick ahead of us, so we miss out on him. My tight end 1 is not Kelce, and at the moment he would be my tight end 3. That would be after Sam Laporta and also Trey McBride. So again, be aggressive. And Kelce is a cachet name who is probably on the back end of his career, but it's very hard to, if we get to week 17 and Kelce has 17 touchdowns at that point, it's not hard to paint that picture for yourself. But I think it's aggressively early to be taking him at that selection. But rather than talk about that selection, I want to talk about the Drake London pick, because you mentioned Kirk Cousins, and there's 2 players at that pick that I would have been kind of wanting to go for. The other one's probably a bit more aggressive. He goes in the mid-second round here, and that's Chris Olave. There are 2 players in this range that I'm very, very interested in once Wilson and Brown and Nakua have gone off the board. Both players who, and I won't say there's a quarterback upgrade for Olave, because there is not, but I do think that offense is going to improve quite a bit. And I think I seen Hayden Winks had done a kind of a collage or a set of clips of you had replied to earlier today with Lamar Jackson and Flowers. But I do think that you can do a very similar set of clips for Derek Carr and Chris Olave last year, because there was so many plays that were, within inches of being huge plays and points left on the field. And that could be just a case that Derek Carr isn't that good and he's not able to find Chris Olave. But it could be the same for when we're going to hype up somebody like Zay Jones, maybe when it comes to a potential option to pick him up. Maybe that is just a deficiency in that offense or in that quarterback. But I think both of those guys project to take jumps forward, and they're both in good situations with playing in domes, should be in offenses that are going to have to score. And I'm excited. I know we didn't take Olavi, but I'd like to talk about him. But Drake London couldn't really have a better situation. It may not work out, but going from what he had last year and now having Kirk Cousins is just so big for him and for that offense. And Cousins isn't somebody that I actively root for. And I think sometimes he held back Justin Jefferson, even with how good he has been. But with London and that situation, like my favorite quote this offseason was at the draft when, the head coach is saying if the quarterback wasn't as bad as it was last year, like he wouldn't have the job. And, that's the kind of situation we're seeing an improvement in. So pretty aggressive on London there.
It just comes down to snaps. He's going to play so many more snaps because the offense is going to be so much more efficient and he's going to see so many more catchable balls. We're one pick away. Derrick Henry, Michael Pittman, Cooper Kupp, Malik Neighbors, Josh Jacobs, or we could start looking a bit further down. I would not be surprised if Patrick Mahomes goes to our team on the corner here. We could look at a Lamar, Zay Flowers, or Mark Andrews kind of stack around here.
How do you feel about the option is you probably get Zay Flowers back on the wraparound if there's another wide receiver you want to take above him in the likes of a Kupp, but Flowers is my prime.
I'm fine with Kupp, but if you want to go Flowers, let's go Flowers.
Okay. I would let him come back around. Let's go Kupp.
But
have we made the selection?
What's gonna happen here is that if Kupp doesn't come back around or one of those wide receivers, then we've got a chance to take Lamar.
Yeah, that was the kind of backup that I was kind of thinking through in my head. It is, again, I think when you're reaching half a round to a round, and especially for players that we really want to have on our rosters, it's completely fine with me. But the interesting thing with Flowers here is I don't think it's, in my opinion, that aggressive, but it also opens up the door to that potential stack, which could be very, very intriguing as well. And then maybe we'll have to talk about Tez Walker later in the show if we get to that point. Kupp does go off the board, and it's the 2v2 conversation that we will have when we get to that point. Derrick Henry went off the pick after. So maybe the Derrick Henry owner is imagining a lot of Lamar Jackson screen passes to Derrick Henry being the evolution. I've always wanted more Derrick Henry screen passes. Maybe this is the year they happen. Pacheco goes off the board. So for you, is there another player that you would like? As we have the option here if you want. So let's jump back to the queue.
I mean, Malik Neighbors is 5 spots below ADP. Josh Jacobs, I was kind of high on, but I've started dropping down. I think we could either go Tank Dell for the week 17 correlation, or we take one of Lamar or Mark Andrews.
Yeah, I think Jackson's probably the play here. I think I wouldn't go as far as to say there's going to be comparative, wide receivers to the likes of Neighbors, but like as big of a T. Higgins, I was going to say fan, but I could say stan as well, that I am. I think adding in, we're talking before the show about the leverage that you want to have in week 17, and the problem is going to be, if you're drafting at the back end of the draft, it's not that hard to pair Flowers and Jackson, but it might be a case with the other pieces that we can put together, we can have some of that, explosive nature in week 17. I think when we were, if we pass up on Jackson there, you're looking at, Aaron Rodgers or Kirk Cousins, who we mentioned a moment ago, is kind of trying to primary stack around the Jets or the Falcons. We may even do that as a secondary option. I just think the upside of pairing those two is massive.
Yeah, and I think it just kind of comes back to, for me, in the current landscape, I want either an elite quarterback or an elite tight end if I can't have both. I don't want to be getting to sort of like round 8 and going, okay, which pocket passing quarterback am I going to pair with? Am I going to have to take Cole Kmet as my tight end 1? And it just feels like...
Are you ready for this here conversation? Is Mark Andrews still an elite tight end?
What makes Mark Andrews not an elite tight end at this point? The fact that he got injured and that he's 29 years old, like this, it's not the position where people drop off. I know that his yards per route run dipped a little last year, and it wasn't as much, but got to cut him a little bit of a slack for the new offense. And it was only really the back end of the year where the Ravens offense got going, it felt like, for me as a Ravens fan. So I'm kind of willing to say that they're going to hit the ground running this year. And when all's said and done, with the Ravens not bringing in any competition at pass catcher, I think that Mark Andrews is still going to be the dominant player on the offense. but I'm also expecting a big jump from Zay Flowers.
Yeah, so I would agree with all of that. I think that, the injury is what kind of caused the concern. The reality is, though, outside of his monster season, I believe now it was in 2021, you start to get a little bit step back from that. And that is the 1 year of his career that he truly hit those kind of levels. For me, he feels like, and this is another player I really like, but he kind of feels to me like George Kittle, who is for me just right on the edge of that elite tight end here. So if we can have the opportunity to select either of them, I would be happy. But there's a number of other names that I would have. I would find it very hard outside of a team that had already got Lamar Jackson to take Mark Andrews over Trey McBride, for example. And that would be the way I would have looked at that. It's for me to have Flowers and Jackson versus to have Flowers and Andrews and another quarterback. I'm okay with that.
Part of the thing with Mark Andrews, but like I go back to, is the Ravens are always going to be a fairly efficient offense. Lamar's always been very good in the red zone. And I mean, Mark Andrews had 6 touchdowns when he got injured last year. Yeah. The only player who had more than that, I think, was it was just Sam Laporta in the regular season, wasn't it? He finished week 17 with 9. So I don't think that's going to disappear. And I know touchdowns aren't something which we want to take big bets on year to year, but Lamar's always been the kind of quarterback who looks to players that he implicitly trusts in the red zone. And last year that screwed him up a bit at times when he was throwing fades to Odell Beckham. But outside of Zay Flowers, I don't see anyone who we'd be throwing to a lot there. So we're a couple of picks away, Colm. I mean, if he makes it back to us, that would be...
That would be very interesting if that does happen. The one player there that I talked about, and it was Trey McBride, and I do notice the drafter who did admit that he was in the 5 spot has taken Trey McBride there. He would have been a nice one to come back, but I am in the situation here, like, if Andrews comes back, I wouldn't be against Mark Andrews and Kyle Pitts, who would be the next tight end by ADP, to then try and pair in and get us some Kirk Cousins, who I already have. I like to do this early in shows because the players that I like to draft, then I usually say that their quarterbacks are no good, and then I end up drafting them later in the show. So I also must apologize. It wasn't the drafter in 5 that took him. So we are in a situation here where I think it has to be the pick.
I mean, that's the first time I've landed the 3 of them on one team since the very early days when the drafts first opened.
So. And I mentioned the week 17 stuff and, the correlation between one of those and Jackson, being a possibility. The 3 of them together, I think, is going to be relatively hard to do. And when we took Jackson, I was kind of thinking you have to give up one of those pieces. I think it's pretty special to get the 3 of them in that situation because although I did mention Tez Walker, I do think it's going to be a highly concentrated offense because you also have Derrick Henry in there. You have the rushing ability of Lamar. So, and you mentioned one thing they are is they're very, very efficient as things move. So we are back here. No, we aren't. Are we back?
Yeah. We're back on the clock. So do you want to go with Kyle Pitts? Give us that build
I think that's the way I would chance it. It is going to we're going to end up with a lot of week 12 players, I think, by this, but I think he's the pick for me at this point.
Yeah, so I mean, the Ravens are on week 14, so it's not too bad. Yeah, Garrett Wilson, Drake London, Kyle Pitts. So we've got 2 bye weeks, which are pretty heavy on, but we'll work that out as we go.
We're going to have opposite weeks, obviously, with Jackson and our future pick, Kirk Cousins, as well, so that'll be okay. I think, to go through those opening 6 rounds, to have the trio from the Ravens, then to have Kyle Pitts as a second tight end, and then to have the 3 wide receivers is pretty ideal because we talked about the elite tight ends, and for me, I want to have 2 tight ends before I kind of go past Njoku. And I think now we're set up with that. And again, it's going to give us flexibility later if we want to go tight end or not. I do think after that point, you start to really, fall off. And again, the same case that I made for Drake London, just copy and paste that conversation towards Kyle Pitts. And also, Jonnu Smith is no longer there, which will help things as well.
You'd like to imagine. So you said is
Arthur Smith. I mentioned that too.
That's the big one. So did you say Trey McBride's your tight end 1?
No, tight end 2. Laporta tight end 1. Yeah.
I fully believe you make a very strong case for Trey McBride as tight end one. I mean, he had 3 touchdowns last year, and in an offense which was spluttering at times. And I fully believe that he's somebody that I want to be above 8% on. But Sam Laporta is somebody I think I'll probably end up around 5% on, just because of the cost involved with taking him.
Yeah. The one thing I would say about both of those guys is they are also in an ADP range. Like, I kind of like a lot of the players in rounds 3 through 5. More so almost sometimes in some of the wide receivers that are going in, round 2 and round 3. So they're in ranges where it's challenging to have them. They're also, at a quite expensive price. But I think, again, players who are that young and ascending, the chances for them to make the leap, like, I'm quite confident in this draft that Mark Andrews is going to be the oldest player that we draft, but all the other players are going to be taking a jump forward this season. So again, drafting a team for what we expect to be the case after week 17 rather than where we think they are right now is what we're trying to do here. The other player when we took Kyle Pitts that I'm kind of interested in, is kind of my break off point for looking at some of these running backs. Kenneth Walker continues to be very intriguing. And the player that you mentioned in one of your targets is Aaron Jones, somebody who I'm not as much on, but I do think that he's set up to get a lot of work there in Minnesota. I'm kind of targeting that more through the passing game. But you did mention Trey McBride, and I do think that him and Laporta are quite close. But the one part is Laporta was a rookie and did it, and Trey McBride unfortunately still had to wait until Zach Ertz was no longer on the roster after a season and a half that he was behind him. So there is that. And, I would class him as the wide receiver one on that Cardinals team, but you now have Marvin Harrison to contend with. And the other last part is I'm just not sold on Kyler Murray long term as to how that's going to work out. He's had, a lot of kind of down years and injuries since, which was one of the most electrifying seasons, from a quarterback in recent history. So there's a couple of concerns, but Trey McBride is extremely talented. And they were my 2 highest drafted tight ends last year at laughable margins. I believe I had over at the FFPC, I had them both in the kind of high teens into the 20%. So they were also much easier to draft on the same rosters last year as well at the prices. But the one thing we might touch on later in the draft is tight ends. Once you go past round 10, it's not as appetizing as it was to do it that way last season. And that's one of the reasons I want to get 2 of those guys, kind of in those opening 10 rounds this year. So we are a couple of picks away. Who are some of the names that are standing out to you here as we get ready to pick?
I mean, Zamir White's fallen 8 picks past ADP, which feels fine. I don't mind Ramondre. I've started taking him in some of my slow drafts. Deontay Johnson is a player that I can't quit, and I think he'll see plenty of volume. But yeah, we're kind of really coming up to a wide receiver drop-off. So, if we want to get our, 4th wide receiver here, then it's probably Deontay, Rashee Rice, Jackson Smith and Jigba, Jameson Williams.
How do you feel about JSN here?
I'd be fine taking JSN. I'm at 15% across the drafts I've done. I think people are a little too down on him, a little too quick. I'm happy with him if you are.
Yep.
I think it's like, you look at what the Seahawks have done. The offensive coordinator they brought in from Washington is somebody who really made things work there. And I don't really have any worries about it. So we're at 4 wide receivers, 2 tight ends, and our quarterback with Lamar, of course. When we come back around here, Colm, anyone in particular you want to bang the table for? Ramondre, Dak Prescott, James Conner, Deontay, Mostert, and Joku.
He just went off the board. It would have been Jalen Warren, but he's after going. Or he didn't go, actually. Sorry, he jumped down. It must have been when you changed the tab.
Yeah.
He would be the running back that I would look at here. He would be my prime option if we were starting to switch that direction. Have you any running back that you prefer over him?
Well, as you can see at my 50% exposure, okay. I'm completely fine with Jalen Warren. I think there'll be a time where I'm
trying to make all these picks, without checking. I haven't checked the exposures at all, so it's not a case I'm saying like who does. And if I knew it was 50, I'd be saying maybe you should get a little bit less than 50%. But he's my running back one, I guess, that I want to draft. Not that he's the running back. He's the one that I be like, right, this is the spot. And I'm disappointed if I miss out on him. And obviously it must be the same for you.
Yeah, and I am mixing in Najee Harris for the first
Yeah.
time ever, and I think where he's at, this is the point where last year, if these players had been in the same range, I would have taken them both then. But the point against Najee was always that he was too expensive for what we knew, and Jalen Warren was always too cheap. Whereas now I'll keep taking Jalen Warren until, if he was a fringe back end round 6 player, then I'd start to struggle with him. But for now, I think, yeah, you're talking about a very explosive player, the kind of player that we want on best ball teams. And maybe as our RB1, he doesn't profile perfectly. Maybe you want somebody with a bit more projectable volume, but he's just a fun player. And sometimes it's just fun to take the fun players.
The problem with projectable volume is it's projectable now, but it means nothing during the season. So, Ramondre Stevenson is definitely going to be projected to have more work. And I was so in on Stevenson last year, and I still think there's a very talented player there, and he goes one pick before our pick. But, that's what gets people into trouble in the running back dead zone is projectable volume. There is a number of players, though, in this range. James Conner, I think, is very interesting. Obviously there's rookie competition there for him this season, but he's coming off his best year of his career. You have Mostert, who I think, obviously he's 31 years old at this point, but he's coming off the best year of his career. Will he do the touchdowns that he did last year? No, he won't, but he also is, in a spike week environment on one of the best offenses in the entire league. So getting pieces of the Miami backfield is very intriguing. But there's some names that'll be coming up here that I think this is an area where over the next couple of rounds, we'll probably try and get ourselves, 2 more or 3 more running backs and try and play it out that way. I really do. We didn't talk about JSN, really. You mentioned, some of the changes with Seattle, but it's very easy to forget with how last season started that he, fractured his wrist in the preseason, was meant to kind of go on pop, didn't go on it, then played with a soft cast for a number of weeks. At hindsight, that probably wasn't the best decision for him. And then we look at, how the season progressed, and it didn't progress the way we wanted, but there's still flashes there. And what you want to do is, like, if there's a dip on these players who were highly thought of as rookies and you're heading into the second season, I think this is the time, to go and buy those and have them on your roster, because there's every chance that we see his ADP with, say, DK Metcalf flip when we're drafting again in 2025. So they're the sort of players that I'm very happy to take a chance on. So we are coming up again in a couple of selections. I see you're starring some names, one being Kirk Cousins, who would be, a couple of rounds down the line, but it's good to have them profiled in there. Who are you looking at here in this next pick?
I mean, I've been mixing in a decent bit of Trey Benson for reasons you kind of mentioned. I don't mind Devin Singletary, Khalil Shakir. I mean, we could go a number of different ways. I don't have a strong push on this one, Colm, so I'm open to suggestions. Brian Robinson's someone I've been taking a lot of.
Okay, we're on the clock, so I think we'll take either Trey Benson. You didn't mention Javonte Williams. I think we could have went that way, but let's take Benson here and see who comes back around. Are you completely out on Williams?
Yeah, and I mean, Sam Sherman put out a good thread yesterday about Javonte Williams and whether he's ever actually been good. And whilst I think, year one he was, I just don't think there's the environment there for him now for him to be what
I don't think there's a spot there to be the true bell cow, but if, it's also an environment where if we get 6 weeks into the season and he's the only one delivering, that can re-emerge. I do think it could be a possibility that the injuries have just, taken away what people wanted to see from him. He's one of the players that I kind of have a lot of what ifs. Him and J.K. Dobbins probably as well.
Yeah,
injuries have caught him.
So I mean, we're back on the clock here. Devin Singletary would probably be my lean to give us another running back, unless there's anybody that you'd like. Rashid Shaheed kind of stands out, a wide receiver. Brandon Cooks maybe.
I think I would go with you on Singletary, and part of the reason is, I trashed projectable volume not that long ago in the show, but when we're building out, our running back room, we now have Warren and Singletary, and you're adding in Benson, and I think there is an advantage at this ADP to have a player who you can be like, well, he's going to, at the start of the season at least, be hopefully somebody who's usable to move this squad along in those opening weeks.
And when you pair that with a rookie like Trey Benson, it's almost like giving you that ping-ponging effect going, okay, well, if we can get 7 weeks of Devin Singletary and then we end up with like 9 weeks of Trey Benson being the majority running back, then but I mean, that's what you're kind of hoping for with zero RB teams a lot of the time, isn't it?
Yeah, and I do feel like I know he's obviously now with the Giants. I feel like the 10th round is that's the earliest point I'd be willing to draft Singletary, and he is somebody that, like, as a player on the Buffalo Bills, I was a huge fan of, and I chased that Buffalo Bills backfield for years, thinking that at one point there would be somebody who would step up. It didn't. It didn't happen, but showed some flash down the stretch last year for the Texans. So we'll see what happens. Brian Robinson was somebody you mentioned. He's gone off the board. I think he's interesting as well. But there's all these players have slight question marks around them. The one player that's there who went since we selected is Tajay Spears, and prior to the Pollard signing, I was all in on him, and I still think that he could lead the way and win that role. But we're seeing the 908 Tony Pollard, and then we're seeing the 1006 Tajay Spears. It's an interesting backfield to see how those training camp reports and so on go. But obviously, they've paid Pollard this year. There's going to be some emphasis to get him on the field.
I mean, the same with Austin Eckler and Brian Robinson. Like, I'm taking Brian Robinson ahead of Austin Eckler. I don't think Eckler's going to catch enough passes from Jaden Daniels to make him worthwhile. I don't think he's got as much juice as Brian Robinson at this point.
That's a fair one too. They're the same kind of space in ADP here in this draft away from each other as the Titans. Interesting situation as well.
Yeah, and then the team on the one slot takes Rico Dowd and Ezekiel Elliott for the double tap of the Cowboys running backs, which is definitely interesting. It's not something I do very much. Do you ever do that, Colm?
No, draft Ezekiel Elliott, is that the question? Or is it just with any backfield?
Just with any backfield.
Not something I would do at these prices in the 10th round. You're obviously, if you get the Cowboys starting running back, it's a big win, and you're probably getting a player who should be going in the 3rd round. But realistically, it's hard for me to see either of those guys being, the workhorse. And I don't know what the Cowboys have tried to do this offseason. It's not ideal, but Elliott is back in place, and I was surprised at the selection of both of them, but Elliott's just not on my board, and I'm surprised that he's somebody. Where is his ADP in the 11th round?
Yeah, that's right about where he goes. Is pick 120 to 130, so nothing really unusual there. Rico Dowd is very close to him, so yeah, I've not seen more.
I would be more in these situations of going for the, it may not work out, but going for the upside that all these players could potentially be impactors. And that could happen. They could spread it week by week, but I tend not to pair running backs on the same roster.
Yeah. So we're one pick away. We'll see what his team does and then flick over the cards and see where we're at. The teams behind us got a 2-3-5-0 and a 0-3-6-1. So definitely two very different builds there. So Chase Brown goes. We could take Kirk Cousins here, right about ADP, and then just be done at the quarterback position.
You concerned he's not going to make it around the turn? Is that your concern?
It's just one team which has got the 6 wide receivers.
I think you're right. I think with having the 2 players on the roster, I would push him that little bit. He's right. Like, yeah, there's one pick actually, I think, past ADP, and it's too much leverage to pass up for trying to get a little bit too cute. There is some names here. I don't believe anyone's drafting that's coming after us, but I do have a few players here. One in particular that I would like to get on the roster. So we'll see if he makes it back to us. Are you interested in Jerry Jeudy, for example, with his move? How are you feeling about that change up with the Browns?
I mean, you've got to kind of imagine that they're going to want him out there on the field after they gave him such a big contract when it didn't feel like they really needed to. He's not somebody I've clicked an awful lot of yet. I think typically I end up taking more running back selections in this area, but a wide receiver might make sense. I mean, there's a few in this range who I like. I've not drafted any Xavier Legette, but I could be talked into it. Jahan Dotson is the one player for me who I'm kind of expecting a better year from. But go on, Colm, make your shout.
I was going to say, I would be interested in Charbonnet here. I mentioned Kenneth Walker earlier, but I'm interested in both of those running backs. But is there another name that you want to, like Jerome Ford goes in this kind of zone as well? But I think Charbonnet.
Yeah, I'm good with Charbonnet, and I think like you look at the playoff schedule of Green Bay, Minnesota, and Chicago. Chicago's probably the toughest defense on paper, and I know projecting defense months and months out isn't great process all the time, but they finished the season really strong. But if Charbonnet's the kind of player who can help pull us to the final from shootout games against Green Bay and Minnesota, then I'd be completely fine with that. And it gives us that extra little bit of correlation with JSN.
Yeah, I think that like there's some backfields that I'm just interested in getting pieces on. I mentioned like the Miami Dolphins, but I like both Charbonnet and Walker, and can see a case where if anything happened to either of them and one guy's there, obviously it's a huge amount of work, but I think they can both work as individual pieces as well. And when you're in the 12th round, I think again a player going into his second season can be very interesting. One of the last YouTube videos here on the RotoViz YouTube channel did ask why nobody will talk about Jerome Ford. Again, fits into the similar category. If Charbonnet wasn't there, Ford would have been a target. But I guess it's like falls into similar profile and, similar situation. I would say both of those offenses are quite similar. There's a couple of pieces that are very interesting. It's hard to know what the high upside is for the team, but, there is that path to them being a successful offense. So that's the conversation on Jerome Ford, unless you've any to add to it. But Judy, I think, is interesting if you have gone for, a hero RB build or something, you're trying to continue to work on the wide receiver position. He can be quite interesting in there, because you look at when he came into the NFL, both him and CeeDee Lamb, very similar, prospects coming in. And it took, I would say in the early days, you probably would give the edge to Judy, but that has obviously dramatically changed. But he's, I still believe that talent is in there, and it just, whether it's him or whether it's the offenses he's been in, it hasn't been truly realized. And he was somebody who, 2 seasons ago now, it is, I believe, he, when we get into the playoffs for best ball, was a wild card with the 3 touchdown game towards the end of the season. So there's still a lot of upside, I think. But my problem is I don't have a lot of faith in the quarterback of the Cleveland Browns turning things around with how things have gone over the last couple of seasons for him. So we'll see how it plays out for the Browns. The other player I wanted to ask you about is Quentin Johnson. He went 2 picks before Charbonnet. And, we're talking about players like, I mentioned earlier JSN, but Quentin Johnson, comes in with huge expectations. They ship out both wide receivers. He's in a situation here where he's drafted 1 pick before his running mate Josh Palmer in Los Angeles. I'm still willing to take shares here in the 12th round. How are you feeling about him? I think it's, like, in my opinion, it's much too, like, he may amount to nothing, but at the 12th round price, there's too much upside to not be taken in there.
I think you can make the argument that perhaps Jim Harbaugh and Greg Roman believe in Quentin Johnston enough that that's why they were kind of okay with losing Keenan Allen and Mike Williams. Not saying he's anywhere close to the same
I
page.
would make the case that I don't think that is the case. I think they just got themselves into such a bad cap situation.
But I kind of go back to a point that Denny Carter's made a lot on Roto World's podcast this year, that Jim Harbaugh saw Quentin Johnston go off against him heavily in college, and he wants him to succeed. He feels like he can be a success. And if the coaches kind of believe in that, then I think that Quentin Johnston's going to have every opportunity, because he's only competing with Palmer, Lad McConkey, and really it's the role that he's there for. He could be out there a lot. So I haven't taken a lot of him, but I haven't taken a lot of the Chargers in general. So yeah, I think that's one where when I sit back and review my exposures, I'll probably adjust slightly.
We could get even more into our Atlanta thoughts here with Darnell Mooney. Is there anyone else, though, that you would prioritize at this point?
So looking at the running backs, this kind of section is an area where I end up normally drafting 1 or 2. Ray Davis is fine. Will give us a little week 17 correlation with the Jets. Chuba Hubbard isn't somebody I've been drafting. Marshawn Lloyd, I don't mind, but I prefer the other guys.
We do miss out.
Yeah, so I mean, I don't mind. Like, I think some of the rookie wide receivers here are interested in this area.
Troy Franklin would be my rookie wide receiver if that's. But go back to add him to the queue and go to the running backs. We have 12 seconds left as we get under pressure. Ray Davis or Chuba Hubbard would be my preferred options, probably.
Well, let's go Ray Davis because I've seen Troy Franklin slip a bit more often,
Okay.
and his picks, he's at 162 in
Couple of picks later.
ADP, and we've got that kind of range of rookie wide receivers. So people tend to just reach for one they prefer the most. So I feel that we've probably got a slightly stronger chance of him coming back.
How are we set up here on bye weeks at the moment? I mentioned week 12 earlier. I believe that that's another week 12 bye we're at, but I think we're okay position wise. I think it's just we've only one at the running
Yeah,
back position.
yeah, it's definitely not too bad. Week 12, we're looking at Garrett Wilson, Drake London, Kyle Pitts, Kirk Cousins, and Ray Davis. Week 14 is obviously our Ravens stack of all three of them,
Yeah, I
but
think
then
that's okay
nobody else.
spread throughout the whole draft. The other one is I did mention Mooney. I would have been interested in him. How would you have felt about Mooney there at one more pick?
It feels like somebody there in Atlanta is going to step up and make that wide receiver 2 role their own. And, you know, everybody was willing to make excuses for Justin Fields over the last couple of years, but Darnell Mooney kind of deserves some excuses to be made for him. He wasn't always impressive. He had injuries and stuff like that, but like his rookie season was good.
Yeah.
Troy Franklin makes it back. Should we smash that?
Yeah, I think it's time to get another wide receiver.
I'm good with that. But yeah, Darnell Mooney to me, I mean, was it Justin Fields' rookie season where Darnell Mooney had 60 or so catches? So
He outshone. That was kind of the end of the run, I guess, as a wide receiver one for Allen Robinson. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm definitely willing to take shots at him. I probably should be drafting him a little more than I am at the minute. But I mean, when you think about the guys who are left there in Atlanta with Drake London, outside of Kyle Pitts, it really gets pretty miserable pretty quickly. I mean, you're talking about what? Let me just pull it up here. You've got Rondale Moore, who I don't believe in particularly. I think he'll be a gadget guy and he'll get some snaps and he'll get some touches and he'll
That one
break
hurts.
one. Hey, I've been there. I've been in on Rondale Moore too. But well, would you rather straight up Rondale Moore or Darnell Mooney then?
No, but I think it's a coin flip as to who has the most fantasy points at the end of the season. Like I don't think we can say there's a clear path for either. And basically both of them one has shown us a complete season and then not a huge amount more. The other one has shown us, that he is a gadget player. But I again loved Moore coming into the Cardinals, but again, it never hit the heights. And you mentioned, like I said, it was only one season, but Mooney did come in with 61 receptions as a rookie and 81 receptions in his second season, 4 touchdowns both years, but he had 1,000 yards receiving in that second year. So there was a trajectory that just disappeared. But the other question I would get into is when we're drafting these teams, if you have the quarterback and 2 key players like, London and Pitts and then Flowers and Andrews, it gets to a point where I don't really think we need 5 pieces on an offense, for example. Because the other player I would be mentioning, in this situation is Tez Walker, as I mentioned a few times in the show already. But I think there does become a point where, like, if this team is going on to win this competition, that kind of does need to be concentrated mostly on them too. You don't want it to be like 2 wide receiver 2s with, say, Flowers and Tez Walker, for example, and then Mark Andrews is tight end, 1, and then Jackson's a QB. You probably want it to be, but the part that makes that interesting is, let's say we get to week 17 and in week 14, say Flowers goes down, and week 17's Tez Walker's breakout game. You have to factor in all the different potential scenarios. So that does make that interesting as well.
Yeah, and I want to come back to that in a minute. But Chuba Hubbard kind of falls to us if we'd want him. We are 1 pick away. Then Roman Wilson, Tyrone Tracy, Keaton Mitchell, Bateman, Mims, Jaleel McLaughlin. It's starting to get a little uglier as we go. That's the running back tab. Wide receiver. Anybody you want to bang the table for, Colm?
Did we? Oh, he went. Did he?
Yep, Chuba Hubbard 1 pick before us.
Go to the wide receivers, and then show me the tight ends. Oh, goodness me! Back to the wide receivers. I think we should probably
Quick.
Yeah, let's go with Roman Wilson. Let's try it.
Yeah, I don't mind Roman Wilson. I'm taking a sprinkling of Roman Wilson. I think there's a good chance that he could be a good possession receiver for the Steelers. But just going back to
That was I was hoping that Hubbard was I would have taken him over Ray Davis.
well,
So that would have been ideal. But
so we're at a 2-5-6-2, one pick away. I mean, we can just kind of choose our own adventure here. I think, we go wide receiver, we go running back. Let's have a good scroll.
Yeah, the wide receiver, if I in a vacuum that I'm probably most interested in here is Marvin Mims. But obviously we have already taken an option. But I'm not against taking both of those Denver Broncos wide receivers.
Yeah, and I mentioned this on the Underdog stream I did last night that I'm not scared of the Cincinnati defense in Week 17. So I'd be fine with Marvin Mims if you want to go there.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of upside to both of those younger wide receivers. And it's like this is the other part. Be humble or have humility at this point of the season. Like I said about the coin flip between Mooney and Moore and Atlanta, we're looking at a situation here where we cannot be outstandingly confident that either one of those, who's better out of Franklin as a rookie or Mims as a second-year player. Like it's, so taking those chances, and the one with Roman Wilson, he was quite a little bit there past ADP, and that was what pushed me towards him. When we look at this group of, Burton went before him, we took Franklin, Polk went there, and Carly. I probably have him ahead of Carly, but he's probably the last guy in that list that I'm really trying to get, and it's just this draft has fallen in a way that it made sense to take him. So as we now are in the 17th round, how are you feeling with how we want to fill out the rest of this team in terms of structure?
Yeah, so I like what we did at wide receiver. Normally, I try to end up with about 5 wide receivers before and exit in round 10, but because we went heavier on tight end and we took the diversion to Lamar as well, it kind of wasn't possible. But I think, then we hit on running back in the area where we see league winners come out of it year to year, where we see rookies have opportunity. So for me, I think you're probably looking towards 6 running backs overall. The last 2 years in a row, the most popular builds have been 3-6-8-3 and 2-6-9-3. And I think out of the two of them, I would lean towards the 2-6-9-3 type build, or maybe 2-7-8-3 or something, or similar.
And my question on I think this team's probably unique enough because there's I don't think you can say Cousins is in the elite tier, but he's kind of in that second group in the QB window. But you have him and Jackson, and you have Pitts and Andrews. Does that give you any more edge to go towards 2 and 2, or do you think just the benefit of having the next option? And the other one there, I would add him to the queue, and if anyone watching steals him on us, that's okay. I think Bo Nix would make sense as a third quarterback, and we're looking at potential upside for this particular roster.
I think I'd be Bo Nix. I'd rather take a third quarterback on this team than a third tight end, because we double tapped it. We use those resources so quickly. And if it's the story, do you want to take Bo Nix here?
Yeah, I'm good. It's right at ADP, so I think it's fine.
I think because it's easy enough to tell yourself a story where Kirk Cousins is injured or lingers, or Michael Penix ends up playing down the stretch. Whereas I don't think that's going to be the case with Zach Wilson in Denver playing over Bo Nix. And I just feel slightly better about going 3 QB in this build. We're 2 picks away, obviously 3-5-7-2 now.
Yeah, I probably need.
Okay, I'm good with it then.
There's no discussion. He's going to get drafted before we select, I would say, but
the team ahead of us has got 5 running backs. Maybe doesn't feel.
Oh yes.
So where we're going? Will Shipley.
I would like to add him in.
Let's go. So that gives us Garrett Wilson, Drake London, Zay Flowers, Lamar Jackson, Mark Andrews, Kyle Pitts, JSN, Jalen Warren, Trey Benson, Devin Singletary, Kirk Cousins, Zach Charbonnet, Ray Davis, Troy Franklin, Roman Wilson, Marvin Mims, Bo Nix, and Will Shipley with 2 rounds to go. Feels pretty good to me.
It just gives a lot of flexibility now in the last 2 rounds, obviously, as to what we want to do. But I have Shipley, and the other person, I'm going to say I have the part of the lead for me having Will Shipley as one of the prime targets there. Is Sean Siegel is quite optimistic about how things could work out for him. And the big stopping point for him, obviously, is Saquon Barkley. But Barkley hasn't, had a consistent run of health. And he has at times shown some of the flash from his early seasons. But I think with how much this team runs the ball, Shipley is going to get some opportunities. I think he clearly becomes the second running back. And something for people, looking at running backs to draft is, big gaps in ADP. Where is the opportunity? Like if Saquon Barkley gets injured, where's Will Shipley going? It's probably in the 8th or 9th round. He's going to jump into that 0 RB tier, but he's also still the same player right now. So for projecting forward, I think Shipley is very intriguing and comes in as a rookie with, I think, a lot of potential. And as I mentioned with the Dolphins, one of the best offenses, particularly rushing the ball in the NFL. And the downside that people will factor in there is, DeAndre Swift last season got basically vultured at the goal line every time by Jalen Hurts. There will be some regression towards that last year. There will be some times when they don't get tackled at the 1 yard line and they make it in. So I think Will Shipley there is vastly above the rest of this tier of running back that we're going to see going off the board here over the next couple of picks.
Yeah, and I do like Shipley, and I think he's definitely worth mixing in. He's got good agility, he's a good pass catcher, and those are kind of traits where it's like, even if you've got a bit to get through, I'm kind of all right with taking bets on that sort of stuff. And anyone who knocks him about the 4th round draft capital, that's fine, but that's where all these teams really wanted running backs this year, and there was a whole host of them who went off the board very quickly.
They all basically ran from round 2 to round 4,
Yeah,
people weren't they're basically 0 RB drafters at this point.
Yeah, so we do have a team out of a 2 spot who now has 5 quarterbacks. They went Tua in round 10, Aaron Rodgers in round 12, JJ McCarthy in round 14, and then both Justin Fields and Russell Wilson in rounds 18 and 19.
Yeah. The only thing you can say there is, like, you could say it's a 4 quarterback team, because they've had to take 2 of the one team. I think, again, a bit like I talked about earlier, like, do drafts where you take one and then drafts where you take the other if you like both. Like, I would rather have Justin Fields. I think before the end of the season, he's the starter. The upside is far higher with him leading the offense. So I just would not be burning 2 spots on getting yourself to, a bit like I said, take a bet, pick one side and say, this one here. Like I talked about Charbonnet, there's going to be loads of drafts where I draft Walker. You just take them in different drafts. You don't need them both on the same team. And I think it's playing a little bit too safe. And I don't think you win contests like this playing safe.
I think I'm willing to do that if I start a bit more extreme, but they've gone wide receiver, running back, wide receiver, running back, wide receiver, running back, wide receiver, running back. Like I want to, I want to get weird if I've been extreme and it's like, okay, well,
I only had a quick look as you scroll down through it, but that roster in particular, there's not a lot of correlation either between quarterbacks and the roster in general. It's hard to have 5 quarterbacks and then correlate it to whatever 12 other players that you have at this point of the draft.
Yeah, we've got Tua and Mostert.
Tua and Waddle. They do have some of the Dolphins elements there, I guess. They also have the 3 running backs.
And Rodgers. I'm conscious.
They have the 3 Dolphins running backs also,
which is quite, it's a strategy.
I wanted to have pieces of it. They have all of it.
Yeah,
that's a lot of fantasy points.
So we're one pick away, 3, 6, 7, 2 at the minute. I'm kind of fine if we're done at running back. I definitely don't know if there's anybody that Evan Hull would be the only name I'd possibly make a case for, but I think I'd rather go wide receiver on this pick. Do you want your boy Rondale Moore?
I'll let you go with this one. What's tight end looking like?
Greg Dulcich, Davis Allen.
Give us some Greg Dulcich for this one. We have some. Can we do the week 14 bye? That's the trouble.
We can do the week 14 bye because we just need Kyle Pitts to turn up. We've got him and he's on week 12, so that's fine. So
you're telling me we have no tight end points in week 14?
This is the year. This is the year.
I have with Bo Nix and with the two receivers. Again, you're looking at offenses that are cheap to assemble and stack, and like if we're looking at that, I always go back to the Seahawks with Geno Smith, for example. There's going to be offenses where it's not the attractive offense and people aren't buying in. You're better to be a year too early, and the fact is, then you can acquire it relatively cheaply. Before last season, I was big on Dulcich. Obviously, spent most of the season on injured reserve. Still a young player coming into an offense that I would expect to use the tight end as well. So I think that's a fun pick at this point of the draft. But yeah, week 14, we're a bit stacked up on week 14 scenarios, but we'll make it through. We'll have enough points before that.
So you don't want to take Josh Reynolds here?
No.
Anybody like you want to take a real dart for one that you wouldn't normally get to draft on underdog?
I haven't particularly thought about it. I've been that excited. Jump back to the running backs one more time. I think I would take a shot on some of the Jets running backs. They're both gone, I believe, in the last couple of picks. No, Braylon Allen's Abanikanda there still? No.
I don't think so. Should we take Allen?
Right, let's take Allen then.
There we go. Yeah.
Again, looking at the just purely ADP wise, the big break in ADP from those guys to Breece Hall. I think I would rather have got I see Abanikanda now isn't drafted, but I think I would rather go with him. I'm actually surprised that those guys are still there at this point, and I think probably the reason is people are adding those additional tight ends and additional quarterbacks as those positions. But I think both of those guys should be getting drafted in all formats. With the just like we do not want to see it, but anything happens to Breece Hall and those guys are immediately even in a bigger scenario than I talked about with Saquon Barkley and Shipley. The gap in ADP. Yeah. One of them's going in the first round, and then the second one off the board is in the 20th round of this draft. That's something that you can get a lot of leverage on the field in those situations.
Yeah, I mean, Braylon Allen was one of a few running backs who, if he'd got the kind of really strong draft capital, I mean, we'd be talking about somebody being picked inside the top 10 rounds. And just because he went to the Jets, I'm not going to be out on him completely. But yeah, as you say, quarterbacks being drafted on here who just aren't drafted on underdog. Sam Darnold, Gardner Minshew. It's tight ends as well. Donald Parham, Colby Parkinson, Tyler Higbee, who could miss most of the season. Like, there's some names that just being pushed in there for the sake of filling out those rooms, perhaps.
So give us a rundown. Let us know the whole roster. How are we looking here?
So we finished with 3-7-7-3 from the 10 spot. Garrett Wilson, Drake London, Zay Flowers, Lamar Jackson, Mark Andrews, Kyle Pitts, Jackson Smith and Jigba, Jalen Warren, Trey Benson, Devin Singletary, Kirk Cousins, Zach Charbonnet, Ray Davis, Troy Franklin, Roman Wilson, Marvin Mims, Bo Nix, Will Shipley, Greg Dulcich, and Braylon Allen. So we've got three pretty decent stacks there. Lamar Jackson, Zay Flowers, Mark Andrews, Kirk Cousins with Drake London and Kyle Pitts. And then, of course, the one everyone wants, Bo Nix with Troy Franklin, Marvin Mims, and Greg Dulcich.
Could be the key. You never know. I do think it's an interesting team. I really like a lot of the players we drafted. I think I would probably, in an ideal world, have one more wide receiver, one less running back. But I think the way it worked out, to take Dulcich at the point we have taken him there to fit in with that part of the team, and the other part is just in that 20th round there isn't a lot of options. So the additional running back, and having the potential leverage. On the 8th overall pick of this particular draft, if things go in an unfortunate way, would be quite massive for a team. So you're looking to build that upside as the season progresses. And it mightn't be a case that, Breece Hall is lost for the season, but, if the Jets are in a situation that they aren't able to make the playoffs, let's just say in week 17, and they, sit their starters, and that gives a wider role to one of those second options. Like, it doesn't always have to be a season-ending injury, which we obviously don't want to happen. But I really enjoyed that. I think we're set up pretty well. Any final thoughts, Tom, on this team, the strategy for the contest?
It's not double dipping at tight end isn't something I've done yet this year, so I really liked seeing how that turns out, because I think my natural lean is just to go, okay, I want to be across the wide receivers before they dry up. But if we're hoping Kyle Pitts has the season he has, then he's going to have to end up in the flex spot at some points. When you look at the tight end position, there are very few guys who can give you 100-yard receiving games. And if Kyle Pitts hits in the way which we're hoping he can, then he can be one of those guys. And the 3-point bonus for tight ends on DraftKings can give you huge leverage. You know, you're talking about going from scoring 15 points per game and being like the tight end 4 to go and scoring 18 points per game, and all of a sudden you might be the tight end 2, which doesn't sound a lot, but when you get that kind of leverage upon the people in your league, I think it's very noteworthy. But otherwise, yeah, this was it was a fun draft. You know, we had some smart people in here drafting with us, but we also had a couple of pretty crazy teams with the 5 QB build, the 2 spot, and then the 4-6-6-6-4, the 4 spot. They're not builds I would go with. I mean, you look at teams which have 2 wide receivers in the first 10 rounds, and you're talking now about Josh Downs being your wide receiver 3. You're going to be very much relying on these running backs to hit, and they feel very much like there's a good mix of solid dead zone running back personalities there. But yeah, I mean, DraftKings for me, it's always a fun format. You can always build a bit more different than on some platforms. So it was a fun draft, and looking forward to doing more of these as we go through the summer.
Yeah, so as I mentioned, we'll be doing these hopefully every week on a Tuesday at this particular time. So make sure you are subscribed to the channel. You get those every time they're available. You can follow Tom on Twitter. You can follow myself on Twitter. All that information is in the show notes. But we will be doing this over on a different channel next week. Tom, tell them where they can find it, and tell them what you've got going on over there.
Yeah, you can find us at the Fantasy Sanctuary on YouTube. We've got loads of best ball content coming your way. Mondays, we do underdog streams, myself and my co-host Tyler. That's 6 p.m. Eastern. Then on Wednesday, DraftKings streams. Next week, we've got Pat Crane joining us, so it should be a very fun and very insightful draft. And then as well as lots of best ball strategy videos, which will be rolling out every week or 2 from now until the drafts close, not to mention all of Rich's amazing Dynasty content.
Yeah, so obviously that's where we'll be doing this next week. Then 2 weeks, the plan's to be back here, and we'll shift back and forth. So check out that channel. Of course, subscribe to the RotoViz radio channel, get all the content coming out that way. This will also be available as podcasts over on the RotoViz radio podcast feeds if you prefer to get stuff that way. But lots of fun conversations. The one thing I would say about this team, and that is the fact that we have taken 2 tight ends in Jackson, in those opening 6 rounds. But looking at it, to me, the one part I feel it could be a little bit light is on wide receiver, even though we have taken the 7, and that was where I was talking about the end. But I do think in hindsight, the one pick that we kind of were thinking about what we would do, and that was the JSN pick, where we took him a few picks ahead of ADP. I think this team would look dramatically more challenged at wide receiver if we hadn't have made that selection. So we'll see how it plays out. We'll see if we can take down the top prize, but be sure to come back, join us next week for another stream. Lots of other content going on the channel, including on Thursday. Blair Andrews will be back with another Underdog Best Ball Mania 5 stream. But until we are back, have a good one.